Today it's
Welcome,
time again
welcome,
for another
welcome back. It's always Real to Life. I'm Bernard
Bernard.
Jones, and I just want to take time to say up front, thank you for the new subscribers at Real to Life on my YouTube channel, and I appreciate everyone for liking and hearting the content here at Real to Life. Thanks again for coming back. In this episode, I'm going to give you some practical points on how I dealt with the old life versus the new life, from being married most of my life to being single. All right, so it's a whole new, it feels like a whole new phase. All right, so let's get into it. Practical points of some feelings, some challenges, and what I believe my role was, and my beliefs compared the old life to the new life. So I'll break it down through the 3 marriages. Most of my life I was married. So when I was 20, I got married. The first marriage, a year, 3 months later, it was over. So in that marriage, she was already pregnant. My daughter, who passed away later on, God rest her soul. So it was challenging there as my role as a father, a brand new father. I mean, basically, I had my idea, I had my goal to be the perfect husband and all of that, and the perfect father, but everything fell apart. All right, I remember this little magazine that came from a ministry, and some of you all would probably recognize Fred K. Price from Ever Increasing Faith. And in that magazine, he shared his how him and his wife got married, and they were very young. I think like 18 or 19 or something, like very, very young, and I saw it and I read that. And so my belief was, in God. I had faith, and I just believed that, it's right to get married and all of that, and I should just go ahead and settle down, as they say, and get married. So that's what I did. So my role as a husband, even though my intent was good, I didn't have any experience, and like I said, the whole thing fell apart. So it was challenging in that regard to just get agreement in a lot of areas in the relationship so that we could walk together in agreement. So that was challenging. And then later on to experience the fighting with the courts, just to gain my own visitation rights as a father. All right. So that was my role back then in the first marriage. And then the second marriage, it was a little bit different because I was a stepdad of 4. So, she had previous relationships and all of that, and 4 children already. So I became a stepdad. She wouldn't have any more children because she did that tube ligation thing where they tie your tubes up or something like that. So yeah, I was a stepdad. Now that started out just what seemed to be absolutely perfect. I mean, I couldn't ask for anything more. She was a really good woman, all of that. My role as a father, a provider. I remember one year, it was like a whole year we went where she was out of work, and she worked in the healthcare as a personal aide, the care, personal care workers. And so for whatever reason, she couldn't find a job, and I had no issues with that. It's just that I set out to have 2 jobs at the time, and but that was one challenge, just to put food on the table. But the other challenge was just getting full agreement with the children at the time, because they were preteens, and then later on, because that was a 9-year marriage. So later on, they began their teenage years, and I saw some. Long story short, I saw some illegal activities starting to happen, and I didn't want that in the house, and just other things that caused a lot of tension between me and the children there. So that was a huge challenge, But in the beginning, everything was great. Everyone seemed to be on the same page. I had a good rapport, good relationship with the children, spent time with them and all of that. But yeah, 9 years in that marriage. And so, as my role as a father, a provider, I felt good about all of that. But it got to the point that I was so frustrated. I was so just at my last, the end of my rope, And I remember going to the park one day and just screaming, just screaming to God, like, like I just want out. I need help. And so, yeah, eventually that ended. So the other thing is, well, let me just go to the third marriage. So the story there, I was, well, I wouldn't say the primary breadwinner because she brought in the income also. And but I was my role as provider and father again, because now my son would be born, through her. And this marriage lasted 12 years. All right. And again, everything started out really, really good, seemingly pretty good. She's a good woman, all of that. But things start to unravel in the relationship, and we just couldn't get agreement. So we decided to go through the divorce. And so, as my role as a father and provider and all of that, that's what happened. And I got a couple of notes here. So how I dealt with the challenges, well, again, my belief in God was strong. My faith in God was strong, even though, let me just say, if you're into any kind of sin that it's habitual and you practice that sin, it's going to like weaken your faith. It's going to cause you to feel like shameful. You'll have a lack of confidence. It will weaken your faith, and so that happened to me, throughout my life. And I shared many times in the previous videos what I wrestled with the most, in my own personal life. And it had to do with the sexuality, the X-rated stuff, and the practice of all of that. So I just thank God that it wasn't through, I would say God did it, because, at the end of the day, it's like when we think about self-help and all of this, it's like, yes, we can participate in our deliverance by an act of our free will. We can choose to say, yes, Lord, I surrender. But at the end of the day, it takes God, It's not based on our good works or our how many times we're going to pray or how many times we're going to fast. At the end of the day, when enough is enough, God has the power to set us free. And that's what happened to me. So 14 months later, totally free from all of the sexual immorality, even now. So that leads into my new life, right? Okay, that was the old life, So those three major relationships I had, three marriages. So now into my new life as single, right? So I've been divorced now from the 12-year marriage. What, three? It's almost 3 years, I believe. So yeah, when one goes through a major transition like that, that can be tough. And I just want to encourage someone today to let you know that even though you may think you could never, or things will always be, or the situation will always be one way in your life, I'm a living witness that things can change and it can be good, I used to think that I would always wrestle with the same old demons, with the same old addictions. I used to think that would I ever be free? But I'm learning, and I learned that when God delivers totally, the Bible says you shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free, right? So I'm learning, and I realize that once we are free, the old mindset it doesn't work. So that new mindset, the new perspective of life. So, example, I used to think I could never be single for a long time, 2 months, 3 months, certainly not 5, 6, a whole year, And when I say single, I'm also adding in all of the other sexual activity, that goes with that, with the X-rated stuff, or now you got all of this stuff like OnlyFans, all of this stuff. I'm talking about none of that. I'm talking about absolute purity, absolute uh, abstinence from any sexual activity. All right, I want to make that clear. So I used to think that that was not possible, and I came to believe that it's only the lies of the enemy, So that used to be the old challenge that I used to wrestle with, believing the lies of the enemy, Like I said, believing that life is always going to be like that, and I could never be free. But I thank God that God delivers, God saves, God rescues, He delivers. Amen. All right. So in my new role, my new life as being single, I'm also a father, So, I have my son, and he's in his teenage years now. So the challenge is to help him to see his own gifts and talents, and to uh, direct him in that path, right? What I see in him, I want to share with him, like, you would be good in this, or you can start this type of study or research, or start looking into this, where you can make it a career path, or start your own business. So that's the challenge right now, about life, things that is I just got to drill down into his psychology, so these principles he will never forget. One day he will start to remember the words that I speak to him. So I think that's a big challenge right now. Another big challenge is just, what do you say, like the domestic the domesticality of it all, cleaning, cooking, all of that, preparing meals, washing, well, you can imagine it, being married most of my life, and now being single. Well, one thing that I do is I pay my son. That's called a chore, right? So if he does the dishes, then I give him some money, so that helps. So that's one of my challenges now. Um, Another thing, I got some notes here. Okay, so, and my feelings now is just like absolute. I'm just still amazed, that life can be like this. And many of you that you've been in serious relationships, or you've been married, and then you transition to being single, and you find that you can be alone but not lonely, and then it's only a certain amount of time. You tell me, how long does it take before you feel like, you know what? I'll just be single. This is, I have no problem being single. How long did it take you? How long does it take you to get there in that mindset, right? And so, being single, I have the autonomy, the freedom of my time and space, and, that peace of mind. Yes, come on, somebody. That peace of mind. My blood pressure, where it used to be up, years ago, and all of that. So now my blood pressure is more stable, and, all of that. So that's where I am right now in the new life. My feelings, the role I live out, and the challenges that I face. I just wanted to share all of that, compare the old to the new life. And I will leave it right there for this episode of Real to Life. And I appreciate everyone for tuning in again. Go like and subscribe on my YouTube channel. If anything happens on Facebook, perhaps that will be the only channel available, you see, because I had Threads and Instagram, but I was quote unquote kicked off. So, it's always good to have another option. So I have that YouTube channel over there. Check it out, Real to Life. And also, you can always see all the shorts. A short is a 24-hour story where it's a short picture or with text, short text with a picture. But on YouTube, they keep it permanently. On Facebook, it disappears within 24 hours. So that's one of the benefits right now that stands out on YouTube. All right, until next time, God's grace to you.